Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me on this Wednesday evening. And as you can see, I'm in my usual spot and, of course, waiting for our daughter to finish with her dance lesson. Blessings to you as now we transition into the season of Advent in the church here. And if you're in worship on Sunday, perhaps you're a good Lutheran wearing blue or else purple, the colors of the season, but it's the new church here. And of course, the season of lighting the Advent wreath with that whole belief of light breaking into the darkness. And wherever you choose to worship, perhaps there's a certain message series for Advent, or if you're following the lectionary, a lot of the Old Testament passages, the prophets foretelling the birth of Christ. So blessings to you in this holy season of Advent, this first season as we transition into a new church here. And with that season of newness, I thought I'd focus tonight on a topic that's relevant to all of us, Christian, non-Christian, or perhaps if you're not affiliated with the church community, you stepped away from the church. It's a topic that relates to all of us, even if you stepped away from the church and perhaps stepped away in your relationship with God. And that topic is mean people. So it's a topic that's relevant to individuals, especially if you have kids. It's a topic that relates to you as a parent, as your kids get older and your kids talk about mean kids at school. Perhaps you have mean people where you work, or perhaps a colleague, or perhaps your boss, or you're just kind of used to, well, not used to, but you've encountered mean people. It's kind of a standard dynamic. You cross mean people everywhere you go, and especially if you work with people, customer service, or you're a teacher, or in the public spectrum, you encounter mean people quite often. But for us Christians, how do we encounter mean people, especially in this holiday season? We're out shopping and people's tempers get short when the lines are long, or traffic is congested, people get impatient, or perhaps people are just getting moody because it gets dark so darn early, and it's like at 4:15, 4:20. Well, time to make dinner, and it's only 4:30. So all these dynamics influence who we are, but also all of us have encountered mean people. So how do we relate to mean people? And I don't want to sugarcoat it. It's easy for me as a pastor to say, well, you just forgive people, or you just move on, or you ignore them. But the scriptures kind of give us a unique and inspiring example of how we encounter mean people in a way that nurtures our soul and our well-being as well. So there's a great thing I've come across since my resignation last July. I've focused on various aspects of living and spiritual disciplines, and one of the ones I focused on was how do you encounter and deal with and move away from and move on from mean people. And I came across this wonderful statement. The mean people in our lives gain a measure of control over our lives. Let me say that again. The mean people in our lives gain a measure of control over our lives. It's that dynamic where mean people, it could be in your family, where you work, in your neighborhood, regardless, mean people have a way, this tendency, when they are mean to us, they throw us off balance. And then we're forced to compensate that being pushed off balance. And it's one of those things, perhaps you've encountered this in a social setting where someone you know is in a room with someone who you know has been mean to them or talks down to them. And all of a sudden you notice your friend is acting differently around that individual. It's almost as though they're a different person around that specific person who's been mean to them. It could have been mean recently. It could have been mean in the recent past or in the distant past. All of a sudden, that person takes on a different aura around that mean individual. And perhaps you've also encountered that when you encounter a mean person, it's really hard to be good to people that are not good. It's really hard to be good to people that are not really good people. But we as Christians, it's kind of like, well, you go to church and somebody's mean, you just say, well, you just forgive them. Like I said before, you just try to be good. But let's be honest here. The golden rule is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Well, that's fine. It's fine when everything in life is great. But do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That goes out the window when people are mean to you, when people are mean to your spouse, when people are especially mean to your kids. The golden rule goes out the window. If one of my kids comes home and they tell Michelle and I that someone's mean to them at school, my first reaction as a dad is not do unto others as you would have them do unto you. My first reaction is to be frustrated, angry, and, well, to get even. That's our natural inclination, is to get even. And that's where I came across this iron rule. The iron rule is do unto others as they have done unto you. Do unto others as they have them do as they have done unto you. And because it feels natural and it feels right to get even. Because when we are mistreated by someone, we compensate for being put off balance. And we compensate when we're being mistreated by someone at work. We compensate to get balance and feel right in our lives. And then we seek that balance when we are rude to our spouse, or short-tempered with our kids, or short-tempered with a relative. Because all of a sudden when we encounter somebody mean, we need balance. And we take it out on those closest to us. I confess, I've done that, and I'm sure you've done that as well. But the question is, what do you do with mean people? Your boss, your colleague, teacher. Because getting even makes us even with somebody we don't like. So you think about it, if you want to get even with someone who's mean to you, you're just going down to their level. So why would you want to get even with someone who's you think is already lower than you? Why do you want to stoop down to their level? That's a great question and a great sentiment. You can't ignore them, because if you work with someone who's mean, you just can't ignore them. You can't ignore that relative because you're going to see them every holiday. You can't ignore them, but there's a third option. Not getting even. Getting even's not an option. Ignoring them isn't an option. The third option is something different. And it's modeled by Jesus in the New Testament. What I want to share with you briefly in these next couple minutes is that there's a great example in the Old Testament on how to deal with mean people in an inspiring way. And it deals with a man named King David. A gentleman, King David in the Old Testament, and the story relates to somebody he's close to. So this was King David. Now in the Old Testament, now a little Bible history, I'm looking at 2 Samuel. King David, yes, he was King David, but before he was a king, he would be called Fugitive David. I see Mary Screeman's watching. Hi, Mary, my mother-in-law, and Deb. Thank you, Deb, for that nice comment as well. So Fugitive David. So in the Old Testament, David killed Goliath. Yes, we know how that works. So in that dynamic, he was a teenager. He killed Goliath. So in that moment, he was gaining a great reputation and a great following in the nation of Israel. But then what happened was he had such a great following, King Saul, the king of Israel, was upset because everybody wanted King David when he was older to be king, but King Saul wanted his son John to be king. So what happened after David killed Goliath a few years later, I'm really going fast here, after David killed Goliath, King Saul, in essence, put a bounty on King David. King Saul wanted David to be killed, so he would be off the radar and wouldn't have the following from the people. So then King Saul's son, John, would then be king. So all of a sudden, David found out about King Saul wanting to kill him, and he fled off to the wilderness. So when he was off into the wilderness, I apologize for needing to adjust my chair. When he was off in the wilderness, he got connected with other people that felt mistreated by Saul. So all of a sudden, David has this little community of all these men and their women and children, and their men and their families, women and children, who felt mistreated by Saul. So all of a sudden, what happened was, David and this community of people who felt mistreated by Saul wanted to get even with King Saul. And it's in 1 Samuel chapter 25. I'm going to read it here just briefly. Thank you for watching tonight. So chapter 25, we have King David, Nabal, and a girl named Abigail, lady named Abigail. Then David moved, a certain man in Maon who had property there at Carmel was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. So now this guy named Nabal was very wealthy. So in essence, he had 1,000 sheep, which meant he had like 1,000 cars in the garage. Very wealthy. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. So another thing, Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman. So pretty much every woman in the Bible named Abigail is intelligent and beautiful. And we have a daughter named Abigail. There you go. But her husband was surly and mean in his dealings. So Abigail was beautiful and patient. Her husband Nabal was relentless and mean to other people. So while David, now the story goes, while David was in the desert with his people, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So that was a time when the wealthy learned how wealthy they were going to be, how many sheep they owned, and how much product came from the sheep being sheared. So the wealthy, rich, are getting richer. So he sent 10 young men and said to Nabal, "Go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, 'Long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours.'" So David's telling his 10 messengers, go up to this man Nabal, who's famous and rich, and give him this wonderful greeting, which was in essence a wishing of good health and prosperity for him, which is kind of a formal act of respect. And he says, "Now I hear that it is sheep shearing time when your shepherds were with us. Now when your shepherds, Nabal, were with in the proximity of my people, we did not mistreat them. And the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your servants and they will tell you. In essence, we watched over your property too with your shepherds. We didn't steal from you. We protected you. Therefore," he says, "be favorable towards these young men, these 10 young men, since we come at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them." So in essence, he's saying, we took care of you. We protected your property. Now provide for us out of an act of goodwill. So when David's men arrived, they gave David the report. Nabal then answered David, "Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and meat that I have slaughtered in my shears and give it to men coming from who knows where?" In essence, he's saying, who is this David? Who is these men? I'm not giving you anything. Just be done. Go away. And David's men turned and gave them a report. And David said to his men, "Put on your swords." So they put on their swords, and David put on his. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. So all of a sudden, David's men are going to have the most epic blow-up in reaction to this one man, Nabal. He says, "Put on your swords." And if you notice, the author says, David also put on his sword. And where's that sword from? That's right, Goliath. A symbol of God's protection and providence in David's life. And David, in his emotion and wanting revenge, forgot all about God's presence, forgot about all that God had done for him. And the sword of David that he had since he was a teenager is now being used for evil. In essence, to get revenge and to get even. So, why would I share that story today? Well, it lends to this greatest Old Testament story about overreacting and doing evil in response to evil. Now, in your life, when you return evil for evil out of emotion, what happens? There's often more pain and more anger, division, and frustration. So I'm going to pick up the second half of the story next week. But I want to end tonight just introducing you to that story, but also to end with 4 questions. The four questions are this, on this overreaction from King David. Do you want to get even with someone you don't even like? So when someone's mean to you, first question, do you want to get even with someone you don't even like? Why stoop to their level? Second question, wouldn't you rather want to be ahead? And I came across this dynamic. Be unlike the mean person in your life. Go above and beyond in living out your faith and not acting out of anger. 3, what story do you want to tell? What story do you want to tell? Do you want to say like, well, I got back at him or her and I said this and they felt guilty and everyone agreed with me, whatever. No, do you want to end up in your story to say, you reacted in the same way as a mean person? No. You want to reflect your character, your integrity, your values, in taking the higher road. 4, and this is the springboard to next week's little video to pulling ahead. What would it look like to return good for evil? When someone's mean and evil to you, what does it look like to be good in that situation? So those 4 questions again. Do you want to be even with someone you don't like? 2, wouldn't you rather be ahead? Because by refusing to be mean, you're actually going ahead of that person. 3, what story do you want to tell? To your children, to your grandchildren, to your spouse, and how you responded to somebody that was mean. And 4, what does it look like to be good in response to evil? So finally, why not share a couple stories about me encountering mean people in my ministry? One great question. One person came up to me, Pastor Jim, why are you so thin? You need to put on some weight. And I just said, well, I'm sorry, that's my stature, and I'm training for a marathon. But it's another thing. People are always questioning, why I'm so thin. Well, I train for marathons and I exercise a lot. Another mean situation. I got an anonymous letter in an offering plate one time when my wife was with our younger kids, and the anonymous note said, Pastor Jim, you need to tell your wife to control your kids during worship. They don't need to have dolls everywhere in the row where they're sitting. An anonymous note telling me to tell my wife to control our kids in worship. How do you respond to that? And the final one. Pastor Jim, who are you trying to impress with all your nice fancy suits? How do you respond to that? Now, those are 3 situations, but I'm sure you have situations as well. But it's those situations that God gives us as opportunities to reflect His goodness and His joy. And not stooping to the lower level, but to go higher and to be one step ahead of others around us who are mean. Because you know and I know, in our world, there can be a lot of meanness around us. But also there are opportunities for us to bring God's presence into our world in inspiring ways. And it's just sometimes repaying good for people that mistreat us. So I hope you join me next week, since I'm going to share the second half of the story of King David and Nabal and what happened when David put on his sword and approached the man seeking revenge. So join me next week. And until then, have a wonderful week, everyone, in the second week of Advent. Thank you for joining me tonight as we focus on people being mean and our response. Blessings to you when God gives you those opportunities to reflect God's goodness, peace, and love in every situation. Have a good night, everyone. Stay warm. We'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.